Sometimes it's almost mind-boggling to see how people in television decide the future of these kids in Bar Elias settlement, for example, where we work.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jeffrey Villegas, and you are listening to Insights from Abroad. We are part of the Middle East and South Asia Initiative in the College of Sciences at the University of Central Florida. Our mission here is to educate, engage, and influence the international community, and today I am joined by Hille Hanso. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So Hille is an independent researcher and freelance journalist currently affiliated with Istanbul University. She is the project director at the Estonian Refugee Council. She's the author of My Istanbul. She's produced numerous radio and TV documentaries as well as articles revolving around Turkey and the Middle East, and is a frequent commentator on Middle East issues. She specializes in Turkish domestic and foreign policy, refugee issues in the Middle East and the Syrian conflict, as well as Kurdish nationalism and relations to regional states. And so I'd like to ask you, first off, your role at the Estonian Refugee Council puts you in really close contact with some of the most vulnerable populations in the world. And so I was hoping you might share with us what drew you to this line of work and to do this form of service.
Well, my answer is going to be quite long because, as you mentioned, my background is international relations. And so my focus has been on Turkey and the Middle East for around 7 years when I have been based in Turkey. So I happen to be there like the very historical or almost crucial post-Arab uprisals era. And I see a huge change in the social fabric of many Middle Eastern countries. So those interested in international relations nowadays should note that migration has already brought like the whole new dimension to the ER studies. It is changing the politics of the states. So due to these mass movements of people, like I'm able to learn the region and also follow how the different states and certain power groups and elites use these demographic changes to their own benefit. So yes, I am directly helping the vulnerable groups to cope with the displacement, but at the same time I also learn on a broader level how states use these people almost as a biological weapon by trading with each other on their misfortune and also using them as bargaining chip in negotiations with each other, just to strengthen the leverage over each other. And I also learned through their direct experience, for example, how the terror organizations or militant groups function in the region. So comprehensively, it's like 2-in-1 for me. But as Estonian Refugee Council, I mean, of course, we have an ethical purpose as well, and this is to fight the humanitarian crisis, which has really affected a number of Middle Eastern countries. And as you know, also a huge influx of refugees in Europe has caused a big political change in the landscape of European politics. So what we want to do is to help to give this dignity back to the people and, ease their life during the displacement. And also there's one thing that needs to be mentioned, like there is huge human capital in the Middle East, and we don't want it to go to waste. Like, for example, if you give them a chance to work, and be creative and productive, we, for example, see our social enterprise in Lebanon, in Bekaa Valley, which gives jobs to the refugees, picking up really fast, and it's just the products that they create and the fashion that they create with all these little nuances that they bring back from Syria. It's quite amazing. So, when you are in such a deep distress and such a desperate situation, all you need is like something to cling to. So like income and creativity is actually something very important. And this huge displacement has affected normal functioning of all the countries in the region: Syria, Turkey, Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, even Egypt. And the school systems are really badly damaged among other things. So Like our huge concern is the Generation X, which are the people who grow up with any formal education, who are traumatized, who've seen lots of bad things. You know, they are more or less like deemed to stay in the poverty trap. And we want to help them out of there because, you know, one of the few causes is their vulnerability towards extremist groups. Like the extremist groups go and target these people and engage them in their activities just because they are hopeless. They don't have any other option. So it's also about security. You know, we are mostly funded by Estonian Foreign Ministry, so it's also like on the state level attempt to just ease the situation in the region. So broadly, yeah, that would be all. But of course, there are many other nuances.
So you spoke to a few things there. I was reading some of the interviews that you had done with the Syrian people, and one of the issues I think that arose was refugee status versus migrant status. Like you get different rights, you get different benefits. And so, you know, talking about school, that was one of the things that they had mentioned where, you know, technically you're allowed in school, but there are these kind of excuses like, oh, the classes are full or this or that. And then similarly with the work issue and employment, refugee status aren't allowed to take formal jobs, right? But you say that there are these initiatives to offer employment specifically to refugees. Are these working? As you say, they're working well. Are people recognizing the value in that on a state level?
Well, of course, Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon do not want a huge influx of employees kind of to their markets because these are not countries that are rich themselves. So it's there is a very high competition, and also most of these states kind of have this like domestic issues are that big, let's put it this way, that if you give jobs to the incomers, your own people will start complaining, obviously. So there are, you know, domestic political reasons why the influx is really changing the politics in these countries as well. But school systems, they suffer mainly because most of the people who actually came from Syria are youth, and they stayed in the surrounding countries. And of course, it happened in a large scale in a fairly quick time, so the countries did not have time to respond. And I know many schools that work in 2 or even 3 shifts in these countries, and of course we are doing our best to also like give this informal education because the schools nor in Lebanon neither in Turkey are able to, you know, bring all these people in. Also another field which is really suffering are infrastructure that is needed to deliver electricity, deliver water, because these are water scarce countries as well, if we mention Jordan specifically, for example, but also in Lebanon. So it's a really big burden, and I think a lot more like international help should go there to keep the tensions down, because we are seeing also this pretty xenophobic rhetoric coming into the play, and it has been so many years now, as you know. So it just starts new frictions, both on the domestic political landscape and also, you know, between just people who have to live side by side.
One of your articles mentioned that Russia is kind of pushing an initiative to say, okay, the war is over, Assad has won, it's time to start the rebuilding process and begin reinserting Syrian people into Syria. Mm-hmm. But we talk about issues like the lack of infrastructure for electricity or water, right? And so I'm curious as to your experiences, what do the Syrian people feel like? I mean, I know we kind of spoke briefly about them being kind of used as a bargaining chip, right? Say, okay, well, this is how this needs to work. What are the emotions on the ground of the people who once called that place home? How do they feel about trying to be pushed back into there?
Since I have spoken to the Syrian diaspora in 3 countries, Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey mainly, most of the people want to definitely go back. Like one reason is that the life in other countries is just really harsh for them. As you said, you know, there are no job opportunities, they're not allowed to work, access to medicine and school system is very poor. So they want to return, but the conditions are not there. Like, just to mention a few, for example, young men who fled the war, let's say they ended up in Lebanon, they have escaped military conscription, which is mandatory in Syria. So when they go back, they will be punished. And they don't know how they will be punished. They might be put in prison or they might be fined. And as you have lived already like 7 years almost without anything, you're not able to take this.
Right.
Yeah, and so there is maybe another thing. Syria is not exactly a state of law, it's not a rule of law. So the punishments are often really arbitrary, and the mistrust is really big. And people often ask me, but why didn't they, fight for Syria? You have to keep in mind that there are so many different ethnic and religious groups in Syria, and it's almost like a country where people would live in their different bubbles side by side. So they didn't feel that who they have to fight or who they have to fight, side by side with are exactly representing their cultural or religious or ethnic values.
Right.
So that's why they fled. Now, going back is actually a danger because they will be punished for that decision. And of course, also the infrastructure really is not there. More than half of the housing is damaged in the country. Electricity is scarce, or it's very expensive because there are generators working, you have to pay for it. Water is scarce, although little by little it's normalizing now, obviously, because fighting in many parts has finished, but it's still, not 100% there. And the mistrust I mentioned, some families that I know actually went back to Syria because they are pushed out of Lebanon. The living conditions are so bad there, so that, they thought, okay, even if we have to die, we will go and die at least in our home country, right?
Right.
And they came back to Lebanon because they were disappointed that, they want to send their children to school. The schools are not there. In Lebanon, they at least have, some sort of chance through all kinds of NGOs and with the government help, get the second shift. So they return to Lebanon again, and that really doesn't, these examples are being talked about in the Syrian community. So that doesn't really raise the trust, that, okay, we can actually go. But then at the same time, of course, Iran and Russia that have the most leverage over Syria, they kind of want to legitimize the fact that now the fighting has been stopped and the government is in place and there are political talks going on. So people should kind of start going back. And I see a problem there. People are going back to nothing, first of all. And secondly, the political solution is not there. So they don't know how they will be received. Not many of them actually want to legitimize the power of Iran and Russia because they are not loyal to the government. Now, I think it will take much more time for these people actually have the trust that they can start going back. And I think the basis for this is really the political solution that needs to be there, and the people should know what they're going back to.
What are some of the changes that you've seen in policy, maybe from a Turkish or from Turkey or Lebanon, that have either supported the people or supported the state or this initiative to put them back? How has those policy changes been unfolding?
So, for example, Turkey is kind of polarized in its domestic politics.
Right.
And there are new elections coming up. So, of course, Syrians is one of the issues that people are talking about because unemployment is rising, the economy is suffering. So, of course, you need to find the one who's like a scapegoat, who's guilty. Of course, it's the 3.5 million Syrians who are in Turkey. Very easy target, just to direct the talk from your own shortcomings. There have been numerous reports how some people are forcing back. And, for example, Afrin region, which is under Turkish control, they are saying it's safe to go back there. And although this person might be from Hama or Dara or from wherever, they are being pushed out of Turkey to Afrin. So again, I'm coming back to this change of the social and demographic fabric of the country. And Lebanon has been very frank. Yeah, they really can't handle the situation where every fourth person is a Syrian refugee in the country. The infrastructure, everything is on the verge of collapse, I might even say.
That puts an enormous strain on what was once a typical way of reacting. With your role there at the Estonian Refugee Council, what are some of the relationships that you've built either at the state level or with other NGOs that help support you in your efforts? And what are some of the relationships you would be looking to establish?
Okay, again, there is an international level, there is a regional level, and then there is this person-to-person level. And we, as the Estonian Refugee Council, we definitely want to work with locals who know the local conditions the best. And we have a really, really good partner whose headquarters are in Beirut, and it's called SAWA for Development and Aid. And these are people, who started giving aid since the very first 40 families arrived from Syria to Lebanon. And it's been just a privilege to work with these people, because from a very grassroots level, this NGO grew, and they are now doing really good work in mostly Bekaa Valley. So one should always keep in mind as an NGO that when you come from a safe country, which is, good in economy, which is good in everything, and then you go and enter these countries that to learn the nuances of the real situation on the ground, it will take years. And it has taken me years. So it's always good to side with someone who's very, aware of every detail that's going on the ground. We are blessed with this really nice partner, and our initiative, we call it Masterpiece, but peace written then, as peace, what the Syrians are hoping for. So together with our funding and our cooperation, we've put up this social enterprise, and we now have a fashion line coming up. Anyone who's interested can Awesome. Google it, and these are beautiful products that are coming up now and also on sale. Yeah, I always advise, if you want to enter a country and really help, so to make it your work really relevant, find a local partner who's trustable. But then, on the international level, there have been so many initiatives to ease the situation in Syria. You probably know the Geneva talks in Vienna, and all these have not really been fruitful. So it's the Astana talks that so far have really made some changes, and it's again Russia, Iran, and Turkey who are involved. And from time to time, I find it so weird that I follow these press conferences and the Syrian establishment is not there. There are 3 countries talking about the future of a country.
They're not even there.
And they're not there.
Wow.
Yeah. So it is an exceptional conflict. If you look from the very get-go, how the whole world got involved in Syria and what happened there. It's and now when we are getting closer to the end of at least active fighting, how it's going to work out. It's going to be like a little Cold War going on in that country for many, many years to come, because, the countries who are leading the talks actually are not also democratic countries. So the outcome cannot be a representative democracy, obviously. And there are numerous questions still not solved. It's Idlib, it's the eastern side of Euphrates River, where the Kurdish nationalism has really been inflamed, and they might want to see maybe a federalist solution to Syria. All these questions are still not solved, and so the international level actually really affects how these people who actually work in Bekaa Valley in Lebanon for our social enterprise, their future is affected. It's sometimes it's almost mind-boggling to see how people in television decide the future of these kids in Bar Elias settlement, for example, where we work.
Right. When they're so far disconnected and removed from the reality of the ground.
Exactly. And the things that might look good on paper, when you talk to these people, does it work for you? And they say, no, it doesn't work for me.
Seems crazy even.
It is crazy.
Right. Do you think that aid is the most important aspect to this situation? Do we think that international awareness is the most important aspect? Where do we think that we can really put some focus on to bring some changes about?
Well, you mentioned both levels. Yeah, awareness. Coming from Europe, and that's, as we mentioned, even the European landscape, political landscape is changing, and this xenophobic right-wing rhetoric is really on the rise. That is the direct cause of, majority of Muslim people escaping and, coming to Europe. I have to often, answer questions. What are they like? Are they all dangerous, men being dangerous? You as a, solo woman traveling in the Middle East, do you feel constantly in danger? And I say, no, it's not true. The media is sometimes distorting and it being more scandalous than the reality is, obviously. And so just explaining on a very human level, who are the people? Of course, there are bad and good people in any society.
Right, absolutely.
And these societies are not any different from ours. And I might even say, like me coming from Estonia, which is a very individualist and different social fabric, they are, compared to us, much warmer and much more welcoming even. I'm not saying that the Estonians are not, but it takes time to break the ice, whereas these people are really embracing you from the very get-go. That's one, level. Me as a journalist and as a humanitarian worker as well, I want to do that part as well, because we have a lot of bad media, so the good media should be there as well, and really like fair coverage. Then international level, the political landscape has been changing. The catastrophe is really big. It's almost like a whirlpool, like when the things are starting to go bad, then so many other stakeholders are being drawn into the same conflict as well, and sometimes take their role as well. So things really tend to go out of hands, of any international stakeholder. No one has like 100% leverage over the whole situation. And this is another characteristic, I think, of the Syrian conflict as a whole. So many counterparts, so many stakeholders, and they are not necessarily states. They are, international terror organizations or, local militant groups. So it's a big mess, and it's very difficult to follow. I guess even here in the US, it's even more hard to follow because, you're distanced.
I'm sure that plays a big role. Right? Yeah.
In Europe, we, of course, see it much more directly and to more detail. But, there is also this moral dilemma. Many European states don't know how to handle Syria, because the leverage of Russia and Iran over it is one cause of concern, I would say. And another is that during the rule of the Assad family, I'm afraid around 500,000 people have been killed. 6 million people have been displaced. So, how do you build the relationship with the, elite like this? So the result is that the governments have been kind of quiet, because it's not really sure how it's going to work out. They don't have leverage over it. All they get is masses of people coming from the country. It's a very, very multi-dimensional issue, and it has so many different levels. But I concentrate on the, trying to help the people,
right?
Just, families,
right,
who live in small plastic tents for 7 years in a row. They don't have canalization. They don't have access to electricity. They don't have water.
So is that the standard living condition for refugees? Is that kind of where everyone lies?
It differs country by country. I'm mostly talking about from the perspective of Lebanon at the moment, because this is the project I'm running. But also in Turkey, I might say the situation has settled. And I have to say Turkey has been very kind in receiving the people. They don't count them as refugees. We spoke about that before. The status is guests, so it's kind of undefined.
I think they even have an opportunity to become Turkish citizens. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. And so we've seen Turkish government giving the citizenship to. The numbers always differ what politicians say and what they want to say or what they don't want to say. But I think the estimate is to more than 100,000 Syrians. There is one dimension, for example, for the Turks. There are Turkmen tribes. So they are considered to be almost like Turks. Mm-hmm. So it's very easy for them coming from Syria to get the Turkish nationality. They already know the language is very similar and so on. The culture is very similar. But then there are these attempts to cherry pick also the Syrians that come and that have, businesses and that have capital and that are highly educated, many university students, for example. They get the citizenship fairly easily. And I made a little research on their views and on how they view their future, and most of them actually say that they never want to go back to Syria because Syria has changed so much for them that they find that it's easier now to build their lives in Turkey. So
for those people who do want to enter Syria, do want to go back, what are some of the challenges revolving around going back?
As we spoke before, it's the security first and foremost. It's the unknown factor of the political solution that is not up to them really. Then the infrastructure that's not there. School system.
Are there policies that say no, you can't go here, or if you're from here, you can't go there, or what are some of those?
Yes, there are. There are a number of laws at the moment in place in Syria which can kind of take someone's property, for example. The problem is that at least 40% of the documents needed to prove your ownership are not there anymore. People escaped, there were fires, there were, just also some people, they were really afraid to keep any documents on them, so they either burned them or threw them in the water, not to have anything, to ask for asylum in other countries and so on. So, yes, this is actually a big issue. When you go back, how do you prove that you are the owner of something? And I know that there are regions where the government is not allowing people to even go back, so we're talking of hundreds of thousands of people, and also a lot of the properties have been sold or given to groups. So you might find that when you go back to your town,
someone else is already there.
Yeah, someone is already there, and as we said, the rule of law is not really in place, so it will be very difficult. Yeah, and also I have a number of friends, Syrian friends in Turkey, who are just trying to sell whatever they have there, and just build their lives in Turkey or in Germany or Sweden. And in 10 years maybe see if they can go back and they can do something, but they're not very hopeful that they can ever go back to a normal life as it was for them before.
With this this Generation X and this kind of you spoke of human capital and not being really able to tap into those things, have you seen any efforts from the international community to maybe offer digital education or anything like that? Or are there any outside sources recognizing these problems and trying to take action?
Yes, there actually was an initiative. I'm afraid I don't know where did it ever start functioning, but there was an attempt to create online education system which would use Syrian curriculum, school curriculum. So whichever country you're in, when you learn in groups, even in the refugee camps, for example, you can still graduate. So I'm not really sure where this ended up, but I know that there were Syrians themselves who were trying to push for that idea. Now, I'm not sure the government would cooperate with that initiative, because it's easier to control the population when you have the direct contact with them. And that's also proven by the fact, for example, that when Syrians living abroad in Turkey, for example, when I extend their passport, it's only 2 years that they can extend their passport. When you go there and you're a young man who didn't go to army, you can't get it, or you will be forced to either go back, or you have to take the responsibility for the fact that you didn't fight, and so on. So in all of these things, actually, when Russia and Iran, for example, are trying to push people back to Syria, we see that the government is not really that keen, actually, of taking back these people that, are kind of considered as not loyal. Why did you flee?
Right.
You should have stayed.
Right.
So
that adds an interesting dynamic.
Yes, sure. Absolutely. And I would say the Syrian government definitely will have some sort of leverage over these people, because otherwise they become stateless unless they stay connected to their country. Now there have been talk of the people who are taking the nationalities of other countries, that they should be stripped of their Syrian citizenship at all. So another way to push people to stay in contact as well. It's difficult for those who are outside. There are so many, personal level dilemmas.
And so for anybody listening who just feels compelled to take action, what are some of the things that average people, maybe much like myself, could do to support you, your organization, or some of these people on the ground?
Yeah, again, on the political level, I really wish that people would elect politicians who would rather build peace than sell weapons. Okay, this is the first-hand issue. But on a personal level, really, there are many great initiatives on the ground in the Middle East by different NGOs who produce great things, who create these little social enterprises where the refugees can produce beautiful things, handicrafts, dolls, clothes, furniture. They are able to make a lot of great things. So just by internet research, you can find and you can just buy their products and support them this way. And it's not just showing pity, okay, I buy your products, but the products that they make can be amazing.
Right.
So you actually really get something that is beautiful and carries a lot of meaning. So by directly supporting and buying their products, many of these things are now online.
And what was the organization you mentioned earlier?
Yes, it's Masterpiece.
Masterpiece.
Check it out with the hashtag Masterpiece as well. You can find information. So just by buying these products, you actually can really relieve with one purchase someone's life for a week, for example. And I'm not talking just individuals, but these are big families. Generally, it's 2 parents, even the grandparents, and then there might be 6, 7, up to 12 kids in that tent, and buying these things, it just really changed their lifestyle, their life. Yeah.
Right. And so for anybody listening who wants to reach out to you, is there a way? Are you on social media? How could someone contact you?
Yes, Estonian Refugee Council has a website, and if you want to make a donation, then you know that we are a small NGO and we work directly on the ground. It will not go towards the administration, but it will go towards project itself. So you do through us help someone directly.
Excellent. Well, Hille, thank you so much for being here with us. We really enjoy your insights and your experience.
Thank you very much for having me.